Tonight we're going to talk about our feelings. Doesn't that sound like fun? Actually, I'm lying to you. We're not going to talk about our feelings. What we're going to talk about is the second foundation of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of Vedana. Vedana is a Pali term that roughly translates as feeling tone. I think what we classically think of as our feelings are either sense feelings, I feel hot, I feel cold, or our emotions, like I feel happy, I feel sad, I feel angry, I feel excited, things like that. But in the teachings of the Buddha, the emotions are what are referred to as mental states, and that's like a completely different foundation. That's the third foundation of mindfulness. Mindfulness of feeling tone simply just means paying attention to the quality of our experience. The purpose of being mindful of our feeling tones is to overcome the constant push and pull that we have with craving and aversion. In the psychology world, they use phrases like hedonic tone or valence to describe feeling tones. And I think that can be a little confusing, but it really just means the qualitative tone of your experience. And it's really pretty simple. There's only 3 feeling tones. Those are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So I'm going to talk about why paying attention to our feeling tones is important. And I'm going to talk about what the Buddha said about it and how to pay attention to our feeling tones. And by doing so, how we have the opportunity to live more fully by avoiding unnecessary suffering. So on the surface, Vedana appears like a relatively minor factor of inquiry. I don't think many of us really put much thought into the qualitative tone of our experience. And because we don't really pay attention to it, we don't really realize what a huge insight it can give us into our mental states. Most people often overlook it just because we're not trained to look for it. But it's important enough to not only be the second foundation of mindfulness, but it's also the second of the 5 aggregates, which are really the mechanisms of the human experience. It's also the 7th link of the 12 links of dependent origination. It's the link between experience and craving. So it's basically the driving force behind our motivations to do pretty much anything. It's the reason we crave. And craving's pretty easy. I mean, who here doesn't like to feel good, right? I think most people prefer feeling good over the alternative. It's just what we do. We're drawn to pleasant feelings and things that provide them, and we're averse to pain. It's just in our nature. It's not our fault. It's literally a design flaw that we have. Because humans are pleasure-seeking animals. So it's literally in our DNA to seek out what's pleasurable and to avoid pain. And a lot of times we go to extreme lengths to do so. We look for the right combination of things, people, places, things, substances, whatever. And if we just find the right combo, then we'll be happy, right? Just the right amount of this and the right amount of that, and then we'll be happy. So we chase after what feels good, and pretty much everybody does this until we learn how to not do it. And the problem is some people chase a little harder and longer than others. I mean, after all, what is an addiction but clinging to what we perceive as pleasurable? So pleasant Vedana is pretty easy to spot because it just feels good. We know when we feel good. Unpleasant's pretty easy to spot too. Have you ever, we're all in Florida, have you ever gotten into your car when it's just been sitting in the sun for several hours and you get in and you're like, oh my God, this is just unbearable. It's so hot. That's that unpleasant feeling. It can also be more subtle, like if you're sitting for meditation or just sitting in general, and you just, you feel a little uncomfortable, so you adjust slightly to kind of change your posture so it doesn't, whatever uncomfort you're feeling goes away. That's also the unpleasant. It's like, oh, it's just uncomfortable. Neutral can be a little harder to spot because we're just not used to looking for neutral Vedana, but I think most of human experience falls into the category of neutral. It's just the daily activities like feeding the cat, doing the dishes, driving down the road, just your normal shit, just everyday experience. And that's the majority of life, I think. No strong feelings one way or the other. Just going through the motions. In my experience, there can be a little bit of restlessness and resistance that accompanies the neutral Vedana. It's the feeling of needing or wanting something, not knowing what that is. Just you're sitting there, you're just like, I don't know what I just need to do something. It's wanting that experience to be more pleasant than it is. And I think because of that, we fast forward through life a lot. just constantly seeking out that next pleasurable experience, well, we just completely disregard everything in between, because the neutral is not as strong as the pleasant or the unpleasant. We just don't even pay attention to it. So being mindful of these feeling tones helps us to pay attention more in everyday life, just as we go through the motions. So to fully know Vedana is to put a magnifying glass on the neutral experience and identify which of those could lead to craving and which could lead to aversion. It's a direct window into the conditioning of our tendency to push away what we perceive as pleasant, or what we perceive as an unpleasant experience, and to pull towards what we perceive as a pleasant experience. Alan Watts has this thing that he talked about called the backwards law that describes this perfectly, and that's to try to change things to be like more of a pleasant experience is itself a negative experience, but to accept the negative experience is in itself a positive experience. I think that pretty much describes it perfectly. And that's why being mindful of our feeling tones is so essential, because it makes us happy in the moment. And if it makes us happy and we're not mindful, we tend to seek out more of whatever it is. Or if we're experiencing unpleasant or neutral Vedana, often we just want to change our experience to one that's more pleasurable, rather than just experiencing all that life has to offer. And pleasant feelings are constantly pulling us, and unpleasant feelings are constantly pushing us away. So by cultivating this mindfulness of Vedana, we learn to be content in the present moment, just the way it is, and to be free of preference. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about how we cultivate the ability to pay attention to our feeling tones. In his infinite wisdom, the Buddha gave us, as usual, very precise and to the point instructions on how to master being mindful of Vedana. His instructions for contemplation of feelings are, and this is really simple: when feeling a pleasant feeling, to know, I feel a pleasant feeling. When feeling an unpleasant feeling, to know, I feel an unpleasant feeling. And when feeling a neutral feeling, to know, I feel a neutral feeling. The first time I read that, I was a little confused because it seemed too simple. But it really is just that simple. I think the difficulty comes in recognizing the feeling and distinguishing it from the mental state, because they're so tightly linked. And I think that's where the work comes in, because we're not conditioned to pay attention to it. I think most of us are conditioned to pay more attention to the mind and the processes of the mind, rather than the feeling tones that give rise to these processes and these mental states. And the Buddha was very aware of that. And he described this in a story that's from the Samyutta Nikaya, which is the group discourses. It's called The Two Arrows, or The Two Darts. And in this, he describes two kinds of people: the untaught worldling and the noble disciple. And he gives us the distinguishing characteristics of both of these types of people in this sutta. The untaught worldling experiences pleasant feelings, he experiences painful feelings, and he experiences neutral feelings. A well-taught noble disciple likewise experiences pleasant, painful, and neutral feelings. Now, what is the distinction? The difference that exists herein between a well-taught noble disciple and an untaught worldling. And he continues: when an untaught worldling is touched by a painful feeling, he worries and grieves. He laments, beats his breasts, weeps, and is distraught. He thus experiences two kinds of feelings, a bodily and a mental feeling. It is if a man were pierced by a dart, and following the first piercing, he is hit by a second dart. So that person will experience feelings caused by two darts. But in the case of a well-taught noble disciple, when he is touched by a painful feeling, he will not worry, nor grieve and lament. He will not beat his breast and weep, nor will he be distraught. It is one kind of feeling he experiences, a bodily one, but not a mental feeling. It is if a man who experiences feelings were hit by only a single dart. It is similar with a well-taught noble disciple. When touched by a painful feeling, he will no longer worry, grieve, or lament. He will not beat his breast and weep, nor will he be distraught. He experiences one single feeling, a bodily one. So when we pay attention to Vedana, it's like lifting the veil of our experience to see what lies beneath at its most unconditioned level. We cut through the stories, through the emotions, and all the other bullshit, and we just look at the root feeling that the experience gives us. And that has the potential to give us deep insight into where our mental states arise from. And that really is the key to avoiding most of life's suffering, is distinguishing the feeling from the mental state and not getting the two confused. Knowing that we can be in pain, but not suffer. So, Vedana is weird, obviously. It's a weird thing. And those historical wounds like that, it can be really hard to want to put yourself in a situation where you are open to being hurt again. I get that fully. I think a lot of people do that. And that's just our natural reaction to being hurt. We become averse to it, the situation, exactly what I was saying, the unpleasant situation, we push that away. And so we just don't become involved with it. And I think that's perfectly natural. So what we're doing here is trying to break that habit by stepping through the mental proliferations that are caused by that feeling. So we're separating the feeling from the mental states. Looking at the feeling, just whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Not feeling like emotion, but just the overall hedonic tone or valence of that emotion. Well, not the emotion, but the feeling and that experience. So what's weird about feeling as well is it can present itself physically. The same feeling presents itself physically a lot of times, and the mental state can be completely different. I know that when I started leading groups and talking in front of people, I would get super nervous. You know, that feeling of fear that you get, just like before you have something important to do, like your stomach you get like that knot in your stomach, but excitement presents itself the same way. You get butterflies, you're like, oh, I'm excited. And it's the same thing. It's the same feeling. And really the reason your body reacts that way is it's like it's your blood leaving your digestive tract and going to the rest of your organs, just in case you have to take off and run and get out of here. Like, honestly, that's what it is. So that's why you get the butterflies feelings. But fear and excitement present itself the same way in the body. So like I had to reframe my mental state to work with that physical feeling of fear and just say, okay, well, now I'm just excited. This is just how I feel before I go talk to people. This is how I feel before I get in front of people and I speak. And change that mental state from fear to excitement. And that was the only way I was able to do it. So we can reframe our mental state, even though the physical feeling presents itself the same way. So like there's some things that I do to remind myself, just to stay in touch with, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? I wear a ring. I don't know if anybody here wears rings, but every time I notice my ring, I always touch it. And what am I thinking? What am I feeling? And that helps me bring myself back to center and kind of get a handle on where I'm at in the moment. And so I've talked a little bit about why Vedana is so important. I gave the Buddha's very brief instructions for how to pay attention. This is like the shortest foundation in all of the 4 foundations. It's like all of the rest of them are like super long. This one's like this big. It's like, wait a minute. This is like one of the hardest ones to explain to people because it is so short. There's not a lot to work with there. So we've talked about the Buddha's instructions, and I gave some tips on how to reframe our experience and how to stay mindful of Vedana in our daily life. And the more we practice, the more we notice that these feelings constantly change. Like they're always changing. And if we stay mindful of them and we monitor them, we can see how fast they actually change. What's pleasant or unpleasant one minute may become neutral in the next, or what's neutral could change to an unpleasant feeling depending on the causes and conditions that we find ourselves in. But being mindful helps us to develop an awareness of the nature of impermanence and frees us to let go of our dependence on constant pleasure for happiness. There's this Viktor Frankl quote that I thought was particularly pertinent. It says, happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue. So as long as we're constantly grasping for happiness, we're always going to be a little bit let down.